Welcome to the latest edition of the Cranky Curmudgeon's Corner. My name is Paul Thomas, and this evening we are going to be discussing the Civil War. With us tonight, James Hearn, Daniel Thomas, and Merrick Moses. Welcome, panel. An earlier panel last December made a suggestion that we do a show on the Civil War, so here it is. One of the biggest myths I hope we can dispel tonight is, of course, the real reason behind those bloody 4 years. My interpretation is that after Lincoln was elected in 1860, a great fear arose in the South that it was his intention to end slavery, which was the economic engine of that region and pretty much across the rest of America as well. So, led by South Carolina's decision, articulated in their Declaration of Succession, which states that, and I'm quoting now, an increasing hostility on the part of the non-slave holding states to the institution of slavery has led to a disregard of their obligations, end quote. Well, that main obligation that they're referring to is returning escaped slaves to the custody of their owners. After that, the rest of the Confederacy followed South Carolina's suit. Some folks claim that it isn't about slavery, but preserving the Union, states' rights, or Northern aggression. Based on your education on this issue and any subsequent information you've received after school, what do you think caused the war between the states to commence? Jim, I don't know anyone that in my lifetime that I've met has more background on the Civil War than you. So tell us, what caused the Civil War to start?
Well, if the question is what factor there was that without there may not have been a Civil War, the answer is clearly slavery. Okay. Lincoln said it a number of times. The handwriting was getting more and more clear all the time, but that wasn't the actual cause of that particular war at that particular time. Lincoln ran on the basis of not being of believing that the Constitution did not allow for the federal government to intrude in the states that had slaves regarding slavery. He even tried to pass a law that forbade the federal government from actually trying to abolish slavery. He did that a little bit late. 3 weeks after he put that in front of Congress, they started blowing things up at Fort Sumter. But bottom line was, to say that the war was caused because of slavery would be to say the same thing as if the meteor hadn't hit, the dinosaurs would still be alive. Had we resolved this at the very beginning, this may not have been an issue. There's all sorts of ways that things could have gone over that period of time. I'm asked this question a number of times, and I have the same answer every time. The reason the Civil War began is the same reason as all wars begin, all wars in the history of mankind. The reason violence of a nature like that begins, simple. Both sides thought they could win. And that is explicitly the case here. I understand the idea that we should blame everything on slavery, but from a historical perspective, that really wasn't the case here.
It wasn't the case because, so what they said in the Declaration of Succession, they didn't mean?
The Declaration of Secession was addressing the fact that the North was not returning slaves. It was worded that way, and you could read it that way as well.
But they did secede with that statement. They
That's
seceded
correct.
from the Union with that statement.
They seceded because the North wouldn't return slaves.
Okay.
They didn't secede because they thought that the war would be fought, that a declaration of we're going to end slavery was the issue. The politics at the time wouldn't allow for Lincoln or anybody else in the North to come out and say we're going to cause a war to end slavery. That would be the case. Then would be that the South could declare that the North was being ambitious, and that was theoretically not the case.
All right, Dan, what do you think is the reason the Civil War got started?
There's a really great episode of The Simpsons where Apu, who is a very problematic character, becomes a citizen. And he is asked the same question on his citizenship test. And he stands up and says there are a variety of political and economic factors. And the test proctor holds up his hand and said, just say slavery. I'm going to go with that. The Declaration, the declarations of secession are very clear that the southern states are leaving is because they want to continue to own humans as chattel. That's the reason that they give. And if Florida decides to succeed today because they don't want to be woke, or Tennessee decides to succeed because they don't want drag queens, that will provoke an armed response from the United States government. It was not different than if you try to break away from your country is going to fight to hold it together. If you resist that, that will start a civil war. So yes, I'm going with the much simpler answer. Whatever their reasons were, they were doing it to preserve slavery.
All right, Merrick. You read the question. What do you think it was the cause for the Civil War to start?
Slavery and the kidnap and murder of enslaved African people. That's what caused the Civil War. Jefferson Davis said what he said. I believe what he said. And right now we got a good third of the country that has based whatever their heritage they say they have on a 4 to 5 year war. That's what we're dealing with. And this was about slavery, chattel slavery, slavery that maimed and killed millions. And to assert anything else is pretty much trying to delude what is the obvious.
The 1787 Constitution gave every state 2 senators in every state, a number of congressional representatives based on the proportion of the population, which was skewed in favor of the slave states by counting a non-voting individual slave as 3/5 of a person. This enabled the federal government to impose unpopular mandates, such as the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 and the Dred Scott decision of 1857 to become law. We still have 2 senators per state, which means that every resident of Wyoming has the same power that every 100 residents in California has with the U.S. Senate. And we have a Roberts Court that easily rivals the Taney Court in the arrogance it displays in denying the rights to the freedom of individuals to control their own persons. While we no longer have slaves counting as 3/5, we now have voter suppression and gerrymandering. How helpful is it to point out these deficiencies in our democracy in terms of historical comparisons? Does the exercise have any positive effect? Merrick, I really feel like I'm flapping my gums a lot here. And, I get frustrated because it doesn't seem to be getting through. So, exercises that we're engaging in tonight, is it helpful or am I still flapping my gums futilely?
No, it is helpful. It is helpful. We just got to get the word out. It is helpful. And I'm going to tell you why it's helpful, because we're in an era where a political party is trying to erase the historical memory of the nation. And with erasing that memory, you create a cauldron of ignorance in which people are easily led to do the wrong things. And so that's where we are now. And so these exercises do have an effect because you can't treat an illness if you don't know the diagnosis. And so what people need to understand is we do need to talk about the weaknesses in our democracy. We do need to understand that each generation has a responsibility to make this a more perfect union, with union being the central piece there. So I think that we have to review the health of our democracy every so often so that we can leave true democracy for our descendants.
Jim, a lot of people that I talk to, whenever I mention the word that slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person in the original Constitution, look at me like, "Oh, really? They really did that in the original Constitution? They didn't even know." So, what do you think about that? The fact that so many people don't really know our history and the importance of our going back into that history and bringing it up.
Well, simplest way to get to that is to talk just for a second about gerrymandering. Gerrymandering was coined, that phrase was coined in 1812. And theoretically, it was responsible for Andrew Jackson getting elected. And so it's been around forever. It just has that particular name. The interesting part about that, to your point, is this: gerrymandering, according to race, is illegal in this country. However, I don't think a lot of people understand that gerrymandering based on partisanship is not illegal. And to my way of thinking, those are the same things. You can gerrymander based on demographics, which is the excuse, all you want, with the exception of actually saying that this particular demographic exists in this number in this area. But if you take it to partisanship and what is clearly gerrymandering, that I think is the basis for voter suppression. So to your point, yeah, do we know that this, do people understand what gerrymandering is all about? Do they even care? You know, I have a hard time suggesting that that is a main issue. Certainly, the idea that gerrymandering could be abolished legally is to say that it would have to be abolished by the people who get elected by it. And I would say the odds of that occurring are non-existent.
Okay, Dan, talking about this stuff, how much of a problem do you see in people understanding that the original Constitution actually endorsed slavery and counted people as 3/5 of a person in order to help the slave states gain more power? That was one of the concessions they made in Philadelphia when they wrote this up. Or just go ahead. I mean, how important is it for you to see that we need to be talking about this stuff?
Well, the issue itself is extremely complicated because we can never judge the past by our present and current morality and understanding. Because in 50 years, people are going to look back at this time and say, oh my God, what was wrong with them? And it's not going to be fair to do that to our founding fathers, ancestors, however you want to refer to these people who wrote this and set this system in place. That being said, the system that they created was hella racist, completely patriarchal, the very essence of white male supremacy. They did a great job when they set that up. And we can't ignore that that's what they did, because it's not fair to large swaths of our population to simply ignore it. So we should be talking about it. I believe this is what the cult refers to when they are talking about critical race theory, because it makes white people have a sad that our ancestors might have been mean and exploitive to people who weren't like them. But it is very important that we all be aware of it, because there are systemic injustices baked right into our system that have been there from the very beginning. And if you're not exposed to them, you can't see them. So it's extremely important that it be discussed all the time, very loudly, not just by people of color, not just by women, but by every person who was originally excluded in that original document. And yeah, lots of people don't know about the Three-Fifths Compromise. In 2016, I was having an online Twitter fight with a Bernie Sanders supporter, because I'm still with her. And he actually used the words, "I wish we had some kind of three-fifths compromise for the cities," because Hillary won the people and the people lived in cities and the rural communities were going for Bernie. And so Hillary was winning the Democratic primary. And my response to him was, "You're actually suggesting the three-fifths compromise. I don't think I need to tell you how racist that is, but I kind of think I need to tell you how racist that is."
He probably didn't even know what he was talking about. He didn't know what the three-fifths
No,
was.
he didn't. He knew the term. He had no idea what the origin was.
Right.
And, in 2016, I got to call some dick a racist on Twitter. So,
Hostilities didn't start with the Declaration of Succession in December of 1860 or with Lincoln's inauguration in March of 1861. The actual killing started when the South Carolina militia attacked Fort Sumter in April. Who started the violence and who is most responsible for the violence in our current race war in 2023? Jim, you have to admit that the South Carolina militia was the one that started sending artillery into Fort Sumter, right?
Absolutely. To be precise, the guy who pulled the first lanyard was a man named Edmund Ruffin, who was an old secessionist. He'd been preaching secession for 20 years or so. The guy who was in charge of the militia at the time was a man named George James, who passed the lanyard over to Edmund Ruffin. The interesting part, okay, I'm the Civil War guy, so I want to talk about interesting parts. The interesting part to me in all of that was when Lee surrendered at Appomattox, Edmund Ruffin blew his brains out. And the other guy, George James, was killed at South Mountain because he refused to believe that the Southern Army should ever retreat. So those are the guys who actually started it, and that's my view of Civil War history, and how it fits into all of this is probably a little pedantic, I suppose. The second part of that is, well, I would tell you this: the thing that I have always believed in, as far as the Civil War is concerned, beginning and end, I think the real beginning of the Civil War was Harper's Ferry. And I think the end of it was John Wilkes Booth. So put those into all perspective, and that basically tells you exactly what was going on at the time. Who's responsible for today's race war? I answer that by saying the people that are responsible for the race war today are the people who are profiting by it the most. And that was the same thing in and after the Civil War. So that goes on unabated.
When you say who is profiting the most, you're referring to Fox News?
People like that. I don't think I don't think that
Because
we
we're
know.
talking profits now, so that's
Yeah,
why
exactly.
I went there.
You know, the bottom line there is, which is the second part, those people who believe in what I refer to as Herr Führer are the ones that are creating the most noise these days. And it's not because they think they're maintaining a cause. It's because the people like Fox and everybody else that's profiting by this is simply teaching them to hate. And all they're doing is continuing a line of things that have flowed through generation to generation to generation. It's not just the South. You know, in my view, there are haters, and there always will be haters in every state of the union.
And
Uh,
racists, and racists.
yeah, we'll get to
yeah.
my view of racism at some point in here, I think.
Yeah, I believe that's coming up.
Yeah.
Okay, Dan. I think it's pretty established that the hostilities were started by the South Carolina militia when they attacked Fort Sumter. But who do you view as most responsible for the violence that is occurring in the race war today? Did you hear me, Dan?
I heard you, and I'm pondering how to answer that question. Because it's literally all of us. Like, I don't consider myself to be a racist person, but I have benefited from the exploitation of people of color and the destruction of the indigenous peoples of this country. So, and I can't change that happened. I can't change that I benefited from the prison industrial complex, just like I can't change that I benefited from the financial industry.
But how
And
about the violence? The violence. I mean, you may say you're benefiting from your white privilege status, but do you really feel responsible for the violence that's occurring?
well, I'm not responsible. Let's put it that way. We're all responsible for it if we benefit from it at all. And every white person in this country does benefit from it on some level, whether they want to admit that or not. So like I can trace mine exactly and very easy to follow. And I'm being surrounded by animals. Um, I think mine is more blatant and obvious because of how I was provided for as a child by the jobs held by my parents. Like
Right.
that's easy. That's easy, very easy for me to track. It might be harder for other people to see it, but I'm aware of it. And as soon as I become not aware of it, I think I am committing acts of violence against other people. I mean, nobody sets out to be evil. It's most of these things are caused by either greed or indifference. So if I don't keep those things front and center in my mind, then I'm a big part of the problem.
Merrick, Dan's bringing out a big point here about the legacy of his benefit. You know, he benefited greatly because his dad worked in a industry that was pretty much supplied by racist policies. So should everybody be responsible for the violence that's occurring in the current race war?
I don't know if I would say it was a race war in that respect. I would say that we're in some type of cold race war. Like it's not 1919 when they bombed Greenwood. I mean 1919 when they bombed Greenwood. But it is we are in a space in which people are literally trying to roll back progress, right? I mean, if we look at the history, Black people particularly we've only been full citizens for less than 60 years. And I'm counting the Voting Rights Act with that. So I think that when we talk about responsibility, we have to understand what that means and who is responsible for what. But I will say that, first of all, we're all responsible for educating ourselves, right? If you're over 18, you need to pick up a book. Secondly, I think that one of the hallmarks of America that's um, that's really keeping people back is this idea of American innocence, right? So, oh, we're just so pristine and we didn't do anything, and we won't even deal with our own history, and it perpetuates this cycle of it, perpetuates the cycle of ignorance, right? Which plays into the racial ignorance that we see. And part of this is because we have not divested ourselves from white supremacy, which I believe is a form of malignant narcissism. Because for many people that are part of the dominant population right now, uh, there is this idea that America can do no wrong, or if America did wrong, we didn't really mean it, and we won't deal with our own stuff. But guess what? That's not going to fly anymore, because we have a generation of kids that are learning the truth. This is why they are against so-called wokeness. Because once people, particularly the youth, understand what they're dealing with, they want to change the world. They want to make this an egalitarian place. They do. However, if you keep them stupid, they won't be able to, because they won't have the critical tools to. So this is this is my issue, that this idea of erasing historical memory is what is contributing to the so-called race war. When we literally don't hear half of American history, like I'm listening to the 1619 Project right now on Audible. You all should listen to it, because when I say that the fabric of this country is literally steeped in the blood of indigenous and African people, and that has never been rectified, that creates a karmic situation in which will destroy a civilization. You cannot live on top of this tinderbox and not understand what we're dealing with. We can't stop it, but there are too many people, like the media, like the news, loudmouth people like Marty Walsh, and a lot of those maggots out there that are just really out there. They're all profiting from this. They are the mouthpiece of the so-called silent minority, I want to say. But at the end of the day, we all have a responsibility. We do. We have to educate ourselves.
Okay, I'm going to push back on Jim's assertion that, well, I'm okay with his assertion that the war started at Harper's Ferry, but I'm certainly not buying into that it ended with John Wilkes Booth. Because longtime viewers of this podcast have heard me often say that the Civil War did not end at Appomattox Courthouse in 1865 or with the John Wilkes Booth assassination of Lincoln, but continues to this day. The latest prominent example being on January 6, 2021, when Kevin Seafried proudly carried the Confederate battle flag into the halls of Congress while his fellow comrades violently attempted to overthrow our constitutional republic. Before that, thousands of lynchings were celebrated, well-attended events memorialized by postcard pictures of hung corpses. Today it continues with white supremacists demonizing woke culture as the latest weapon in the war. What do you think it will take for the forces of the Confederacy to finally accept defeat? Now, you don't have to buy into my assertion that these are the forces of Confederacy, but we still sure need to defeat them. Go ahead, Merrick.
First of all, we got to stop giving the good old boys this pass. Oh, he didn't really mean it. He was a kid in the basement that was on the wrong app. Listen, I'm tired of that. Too many Black people have been murdered by these people for all that. So what I suggest is, one, a robust crackdown on all violent white supremacists. All of them. They all needed to be round up. If they've got these guns that they've bought illegally, which I'm sure a lot of them have, or they're planning crazy stuff like, I don't know, shooting up power plants around Baltimore so that it could plunge the city into darkness, or even poisoning reservoirs, they all need to be locked up with haste and speed. Off the break, you getting 10 years off the break.
Okay,
That's what I'm
hold on,
talking
hold
about.
on a second. Hold on a second. Now you need some kind of criteria before you start rounding people up.
Yeah, you
Is
would
that
have to have. Yeah, you would have to have evidence. But if
okay?
you are a rat, I mean, listen, the FBI, CIA, they all know who these people are. Christopher Wray himself said that that domestic terrorism, particularly by the white supremacists, is the greatest threat. So they already got the goods. It's just about how actionable it is. So I say round them up when we have the evidence. Secondly, the Fox News should be incredibly sanctioned for literally fomenting insurrection.
All
They
right. Now, how would you go about imposing those sanctions in
the
a legal,
FCC should
civilized
find
manner?
them. They clearly lied about their coverage. It's in black and white, and they purposely lied. It's all in the text message. They should all be sanctioned. Every last one. I'm talking billions of dollars. Take it all. Take it all.
So
And
you're
then,
talking about this Dominion lawsuit
yes,
and the punitive damages besides the 1.5 billion, right? Is that what you're
yes,
saying? Okay.
yes. They hit him in the pocket. If
Yeah.
Sean Hannity wants to lie and cause insurrection, he should be hitting that pocket because he knowingly lied and he knew what he was doing. And then you've got, who else do you have? Also, foreigners who are citizens who are promoting insurrection. Rupert Murdoch, you need to go. Citizenship revoke. Because this is my thing. If you're a foreign bad actor in the United States of America, if they want to stop the Chinese from buying property in Florida, whatever state it was, surely Elon Musk, he need to be sent back to where he came from too, because he's another one that is promoting division and racism in the country, and also insurrection. Remember now, he put whatchamacallit back, Mr. Orange, back onto Twitter. He says all types of crazy racist stuff, anti-Semitic stuff. If you're going to do that, knowingly trying to destabilize this country, you need to get deported. Send it back to wherever. But if you're going to be in this country doing these type of things and you weren't born here, you need to go back to where you came from because it's too much. They are literally undermining our democracy. If these were black people, they'd already been sanctioned or whatever. Remember, Obama couldn't even wear a tan suit on Easter. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. And then thirdly, we need a effort to actually have actual education in this society, true historical education. A lot of the stuff that I know, I was taught by my parents because I had parents who educated themselves and came from people who knew their history, right? And so I meet people whose kids think that the Underground Railroad was a railroad underground. That's a disgrace. That's telling me they don't even know who Harriet Tubman is, right? There needs to be an up down curriculum that actually speaks the truth, however beautiful or however ugly it is. Because we are literally raising a generation of idiots that don't even know the history of their own country. And that's dangerous because those who do not know their own history will repeat the history that they don't know.
Okay, Jim. Merrick wants to round up these people who want to continue with the Civil War, the Confederacy, but he wants to use evidence of their wrongdoing, but he wants them prosecuted. Now, I kind of feel that really should be done because you have somebody like Trump who has committed all these crimes on national TV that we see these crimes committed and there hasn't been anything done to him. But you see somebody who, like George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery, who end up dead whenever they really didn't have a chance to have a jury trial for the crimes they committed. So I'm kind of like with Merrick on this idea that we need to start rounding up these white supremacists if we want this Confederacy to be defeated. So what do you say about that?
I don't want to be too picky, but somebody like me who's interested in history as truth, I have to say that the issue here is the hate that was created not necessarily during the Civil War, but what happened right after that. When
But hold on a second. Hold on a second. The white supremacy, the loss of that status by the white people who felt they were superior to black people, is where the hate came from. Don't you agree?
exactly,
Okay.
precisely, and it went into law after the Civil War. The powers that be that were alive after Lincoln was assassinated were out to punish the South. Even Frederick Douglass said that he wanted abolition as a punishment for the South. Now, if you're in the South, if you're from the South, and at best you thought of slaves as property, but now you've got the Northerners sending armies down to enforce some form of Reconstruction that by a matter of using it as punishment promoted black people, former slaves, to positions that the whites always had command of. You really
isn't that really just victimhood? I mean, now you're coming
exactly
to punish me. You're coming to punish me because I own these people or because I treated black people poorly. Oh, you shouldn't be punishing me because that makes me the victim here.
The point is that's what was done.
That's not what was done. That was their perception. Their perception was of victimhood.
I would disagree with that on a number of bases, based on the laws. Let's look at it this way: if Lincoln had lived, Reconstruction would have allowed the Southern states back in without an overt reason to begin hating people, forming the KKK, and doing everything that they did at that time. Granted,
that's speculation on your part. You said if Lincoln had lived, but I don't necessarily.
No, I agree with you completely. If he had lived, that is what his vision was, and his vision was there, as he said, to undivide the Union. But we'll never know. What did happen? Andrew Johnson was vehemently of the position that the South should be punished. That what we did to the South, or what the North managed to accomplish in the war, was not nearly enough. They hadn't learned their lesson. They need to know that we are in control. This is the existing government post the Civil War. That absolutely led to the situation where the hatred started and then became rampant. The troops were pulled back that were sent in to quell the riots. Now, they were pulled back because the government wanted to build a railroad. I'll give you that. But in point of fact, the aim of the government post-Civil War was punishment. The aim of the government before the end of the Civil War was to end the war. I think there's a strict distinction between that. However you want to call it.
I'll never agree that the aim was punishment, because I see that notion that the word punishment gives them legitimacy for what they did in Jim Crow.
Precisely.
Okay,
Well,
well,
I quoted,
that's something that they believed, but wasn't necessarily the case.
oh,
was the case. They
can I
punished them
just
at every
interject there?
Yeah, go
possible
ahead,
turn.
Merrick, jump in on this.
Listen, anytime you literally kidnap millions of people and then force mothers to breed with their sons and they should be punished. Oh my God. Yes, they should have been. That what they did changed the course of history forever. They literally decimated a whole continent of people for their own greed. They should have been punished. It is they caused this upon themselves when they took the first Africans. They brought this upon themselves, and whatever they brought upon themselves is their own karma, and they have to deal with it. I'm
Right,
sorry.
and
You cannot excuse genocide. Period. Point blank. These are human beings who were whipped and murdered and raped for profit. They got what they deserved.
I'm not excusing any of that.
People.
I'm not even trying to excuse any of that.
I didn't say you said that. What I was answering the question, what he said was, should they have been punished? And I'm answering in the affirmative, yes. That had nothing to do with what you said.
Right.
What I'm saying is this,
and by punishing them, that made them go from whatever it was they were before, as evil as that was, to a mindset that they were going to get even, and they couldn't get even by taking it out on the North. The only place they could get even was by developing all of the hatred they could possibly do, and they used what they could as examples, if not outright attempts at genocide, which were ultimately condoned by the North.
But they had already been doing forms of genocide past 1619.
Right. I'm talking about in relation to race relations.
There was a slave code in Virginia that allowed mistresses, the wife of the master, to actually escape punishment for killing children by beating them to death. The Virginia legislature passed that bill because so many children were being killed by their mistresses. Okay?
I'm just trying to point out that
what I'm saying is this. They created the situation when they brought the Africans here, point blank. They created that situation. They created that situation through what they did. And really, they have no one to blame but themselves because they brought this on themselves. All of this, I'm a victim, is BS. They are BS. Do you understand? I can't even trace my family all the way back. I can't do that. At least on my mother's side. My father's side is from the Caribbean, right? And so you have people who have been here for almost 500 years and can't even trace their own ancestry back. You see what I'm saying?
Right. I'm talking about an overt.
Okay, hey, I'm gonna let Dan put a capstone on this particular question there. Go ahead, Dan. What's your take on what's been discussed here so far?
I'm sorry, what was the original question?
The original question was about how do you think we're going to be able to defeat the forces of the Confederacy, which I believe are still in play.
It's a mindset. And the only way to change a mindset is with education. I think I'm following the point that is being made about the response to punitive policy. And I'll use a different example. Like Germany was forced to pay for all of World War I. The Allies had a punitive policy towards Germany, and they responded with one of the worst atrocities in history. That's a gross oversimplification, but the stage was set by punishing Germany for all of World War I. In that way, it allowed worse things to happen, and I think that is what is being said about the South and Jim Crow and the lynchings that arose from it. That's how I'm interpreting it anyway. But I don't think we can really. I don't think we can really just pin that behavior all on victimhood, and it's an overwhelming sense of narcissistic superiority. But the white supremacy is just baked into the fabric of this country, and we're not an entirely white country anymore. We're not an entirely male country anymore. We're not an entirely straight country anymore. So we need to kind of let being a straight white cisgender male should not be the pinnacle anymore. It was for a real long time. I think globally that is still the ideal man or the ideal human. Is you look at the statue of the David, the perfect human. That's a straight white guy, and you have to bake that out. You have to be able to see. You have to be able to look at Barack Obama and Kamala Harris and I don't know, Queen Elizabeth and see like, okay, these people didn't fit into that original mold and they still rose up. So you can rise based on merit no matter who you are or what you look like. Queen Elizabeth is a bad example because she was just born.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
but she was still a woman in a long line of dude.
Oh, true, yeah.